As Odysseus and his men escaped the island of the Cyclops, they believed the worst was finally behind them. The giant could no longer stop them, and the sea stretched wide before their ship. But Odysseus made one mistake that would change everything. Filled with pride, he shouted back toward the island, "I am Odysseus, king of Ithaca." Now the Cyclops knew the name of the man who had blinded him. In pain and anger, Polyphemus lifted his hands toward the sky and prayed to his father, Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea. Far beneath the waves, Poseidon heard his son's cry. Dark clouds gathered across the sky. The wind grew cold. The calm sea turned black. Then Poseidon rose from the storm, holding his great trident high above. The crashing waves. His anger shook both the sea and the sky. He made a terrible promise. Odysseus will return home, but only after years of suffering. He will lose his ships. He will lose his friends. And every mile across my sea will become a battle. Without warning, the storm exploded. Towering waves crashed against the wooden ship. Lightning tore across the heavens. The wind ripped at the sails. The sailors fought, with all their strength just to stay alive. Odysseus shouted orders, but his voice disappeared beneath the roar of the storm. For the first time, he understood the truth. He was no longer fighting the sea. He was fighting a god. The tiny ship disappeared between mountains of water. Every wave threatened to become its last. No one knew where the storm would carry them. Odysseus looked into the endless darkness ahead. His journey home had become a curse. After many days, the storm finally began to fade. The black clouds disappeared. Blue skies returned. The sea became calm once again, exhausted but alive. Odysseus and his men reached a peaceful island. This was the home of Aeolus, the ruler of all the winds. Aeolus welcomed Odysseus with kindness and listened as he told the story of Troy, the Cyclops, and Poseidon's anger. The ruler of the winds admired the courage of the king of Ithaca. Before the Greeks continued their journey, Aeolus decided to help them. He gathered every wild and dangerous wind and trapped them. Inside a strong leather bag, only one gentle west wind remained free. It would carry the ship safely home. As he handed the bag to Odysseus, he gave him one simple warning: guard this carefully. Do not let anyone open it. Odysseus thanked him and tied the bag tightly to the mast of his ship. The gentle wind pushed them steadily across the sea. Day after day, the journey became easier. For the first time since leaving Troy, the crew smiled again. It finally seemed that the long journey was almost over. 9 peaceful days passed. Then, as the sun rose over the sea, Odysseus saw the mountains of Ithaca. His kingdom stood on the horizon. After 10 long years, home was finally within reach. Soon he would see his wife, Penelope. Soon he would embrace his son, Telemachus. But after many sleepless nights guiding the ship, Odysseus could no longer stay awake. He closed his eyes for a short rest. The mysterious leather bag remained beside him. The sailors looked at it with growing curiosity. Some believed it was filled with gold. Others believed it held silver and precious jewels. They began whispering among themselves. Why should Odysseus keep all the treasure for himself? Greed slowly replaced loyalty. Ignoring the warning of Aeolus, they untied the ropes and opened the bag. The moment it opened, every trapped wind burst into the sky. A violent storm returned at once. The ship spun wildly across the sea. The sails snapped in the powerful wind. Odysseus woke in shock, but it was already too late. The winds carried them farther and farther away. When the storm finally ended, Ithaca had disappeared. Home had slipped away once again. Days later, the battered ship reached another strange land. A narrow harbor lay between towering cliffs. The water was calm. Everything seemed peaceful. But Odysseus had learned that the quietest places often hid the greatest dangers. Several sailors went ashore to explore. Suddenly, enormous figures appeared high above the cliffs. They were the Laestrygonians, a race of giant warriors. Unlike the Cyclops, there were many of them. Without warning, the giants lifted massive rocks and hurled them toward the Greek ships, which shattered instantly. Ships broke apart. The narrow harbor became a deadly trap. The sailors fought desperately to escape, but there was nowhere to run. Only Odysseus had left his ship outside the harbor. Seeing the disaster, he shouted to his men, "Row!" With every ounce of strength, they escaped into the open sea. behind them, the rest of the Greek fleet was destroyed. Now only one ship remained. Only one crew was left. The journey home had become lonelier than ever. After escaping the land of the giants, another island appeared before them. It was green, peaceful, and covered with thick forests. Hidden among the trees stood a magnificent stone palace. A small group of sailors walked inland to explore. At the entrance, they were welcomed by a beautiful woman named Circe. She smiled warmly and invited the tired travelers inside. She offered them food, wine, and a place to rest. After everything they had suffered, it seemed they had finally found a friend. Little did they know, they had just walked into another deadly trap. The meal was warm, the wine was sweet. For the first time in many weeks, the sailors relaxed. They laughed together, believing their long nightmare was finally over. But Circe was no ordinary woman. She was one of the most powerful sorceresses in the world. As the sailors finished eating, she quietly whispered an ancient spell. A strange silence filled the room. Then one by one, the men began to change. Their hands became hooves. Their bodies were covered with coarse hair. Their voices turned into frightened squeals. Within moments, the brave warriors of Greece had become pigs. Only their human minds remained. They understood everything that had happened, but they could do nothing to stop it. One sailor had stayed outside the palace. Hearing the terrible cries, he ran as fast as he could back to the shore. Breathing heavily, he told Odysseus what he had seen. Without hesitation, Odysseus picked up his sword. If his men were still alive, he would bring them home. As he walked through the forest, a young man suddenly appeared on the path before him. His face was calm. His eyes shone with an almost divine light. It was Hermes, the messenger of the gods. Hermes already knew why Odysseus had come. He warned him about Circe's powerful magic. No ordinary man can resist her spell. Then Hermes pulled a small white flower from the ground. Its roots were black. Its petals shone in the sunlight. "This is called moly," Hermes said. "It is a gift from the gods. As long as you carry it, Circe's magic will have no power over you." He then gave Odysseus one final instruction. When she realizes her spell has failed, draw your sword. Only then will she surrender. With those words, Hermes disappeared as suddenly as he had arrived. Odysseus continued alone toward the palace. His heart was steady. His hand rested firmly on the hilt of his sword. Circe greeted him with the same warm smile she had shown the others. She welcomed him inside. She placed food and wine before him. Odysseus accepted the meal. Then Circe quietly spoke her spell. She waited for the magic to take hold. Nothing happened. Odysseus remained exactly as he was. For the first time in many years, Circe looked surprised. She tried again. Still, nothing changed. Slowly, Odysseus stood up. He pulled his bronze sword from its sheath. The blade gleamed in the light. Circe stepped back. She immediately understood what had happened. Only someone protected by the gods could resist her magic. She lowered her head. "I have been defeated," she admitted. With another spell, she broke the curse. One by one, the pigs returned to their human forms. The sailors stared at their own hands in disbelief. They were men once again. From that day forward, Circe no longer treated Odysseus as an enemy. Instead, she welcomed him and his crew as honored guests. For many months, they remained on her island. The men rested. Their wounds healed. They repaired their ship. For the first time since leaving Troy, they slept without fear. But no matter how peaceful the island became, Odysseus could not forget his true home. Every sunrise reminded him of Ithaca. Every sunset reminded him of Penelope. And every passing day made him wonder how much his son had grown. One morning, Odysseus told Circe that it was time to leave. The sorceress nodded. She knew his journey was far from over. Before he sailed away, she gave him a warning unlike any he had heard before. "If you wish to reach Ithaca," she said, "you must first travel to the land of the dead. You must seek the spirit of the great prophet Tiresias. Only he can show you the road that lies ahead." The words sent a chill through every sailor. No living man had ever willingly entered the underworld. Yet there was no other choice. Following Circe's instructions, Odysseus sailed toward the edge of the known world. With every mile, the sea grew darker. The warm sunlight slowly disappeared. A thick mist spread across the water. The air became cold and silent. Even the birds refused to fly above those cursed waters. At last, they reached a lonely shore where the world of the living met the kingdom of the dead. Odysseus stepped onto the dark land alone. Sword in hand, he walked through the heavy fog. Every shadow seemed alive. Strange whispers drifted through the darkness. It felt as though thousands of unseen eyes were watching him. Following Circe's instructions, he dug a small pit in the earth and made an offering to the spirits below. Slowly, shapes began to rise from the darkness. Countless souls gathered around him. They reached toward the offering, longing for a single taste of life once more. But Odysseus held them back with his sword. He was waiting for only one spirit. At last, an old man appeared from the mist. It was Tiresias, the greatest prophet in all of Greece. Even in death, his wisdom had not faded. After drinking from the offering, Tiresias looked into Odysseus's eyes. His voice echoed through the silent valley. "You will return home, but the road will demand a terrible price. Poseidon will never stop hunting you. And soon you will reach the island of Helios, the sun god. There you will find a sacred herd of cattle. No matter how hungry your men become, do not let them touch a single animal. If they do, everything will be lost." With those final words, the prophet slowly disappeared back into the darkness. As the prophet faded into the darkness, another spirit slowly stepped forward. Odysseus looked closely. His heart nearly stopped. It was his mother. She had been alive when he left for Troy. He had never imagined that he would meet her here. For a moment, he forgot where he was. He rushed toward her, hoping to hold her in his arms, but his hands passed through empty air. She was only a spirit. No matter how hard he tried, he could never touch her again. His mother smiled. "Gently, my son," she said. "I have waited so long to see you." Odysseus struggled to find the words. He asked about his home. He asked about his wife. He asked about his father, and he asked about the son he had left behind as a baby. His mother's voice was calm, but filled with sadness. "Penelope still waits for you. She has never stopped, believing you will return. But every day becomes harder. Many powerful men have entered your palace. They eat your food. They drink your wine. And they demand that Penelope choose one of them as her new husband." Odysseus lowered his head. The thought of strangers living in his home filled him with pain. His mother continued, "Your son, Telemachus, is no longer a child. He has grown into a strong young man. He protects your house as best he can, but he cannot fight them alone." Then she spoke of his father. "Laertes has become an old man. He spends his days working alone in the fields. He believes he will never see you again." Every word felt heavier than the last. Odysseus had faced monsters. He had survived storms. He had escaped death again and again. Yet nothing had prepared him for this moment. He reached toward his mother one last time. Once again, his hands touched nothing but cold air. Slowly, her spirit began to fade. "My son, do not lose hope. Return to your family. They still wait for you." Then she disappeared into the darkness. Odysseus stood alone. The silence of the underworld surrounded him once again, for the first time since leaving Troy. Tears filled his eyes. He had survived every battle, but saying goodbye to his own mother was the hardest thing he had ever done. With a heavy heart, Odysseus returned to his ship. The crew could see the sadness on his face. No one asked what he had seen. Some questions needed no answer. The black shores of the underworld slowly disappeared behind them. Ahead lay another deadly challenge. Circe had warned him about creatures whose voices were more dangerous than any sword. No sailor who followed their song had ever returned. Days later, the sea became strangely calm. The wind almost disappeared. Even the birds were silent. Odysseus knew they were getting close. "The sirens," he whispered. Before the island came into view, he gathered every man on the ship. Following Circe's instructions, they melted beeswax over a small fire. One by one, each sailor pressed the warm wax into his ears until he could hear nothing at all. Then Odysseus gave one final order: "Tie me tightly to the mast. No matter what I say, no matter how much I beg, do not untie me. If I struggle, tie the ropes even tighter." The sailors obeyed. They wrapped thick ropes around his chest, his arms, and his legs. Odysseus took one last deep breath. Soon, the island of the sirens appeared through the morning mist. Beautiful voices drifted across the sea. Their song was unlike anything any human had ever heard. It promised wisdom. It promised glory. It promised every dream hidden inside a person's heart. The sirens called to Odysseus by name. Come to us. We know everything. We know your past. We know your future. We can end your suffering. The music filled his mind. Every word felt true. Every promise felt real. Odysseus pulled against the ropes with all his strength. He shouted for his men to release him. He begged them. He ordered them. He screamed until his voice became hoarse. But the sailors heard nothing. The beeswax protected them from the deadly song. Seeing their captain struggle, they remembered his command. Instead of freeing him, they pulled the ropes even tighter. Slowly, the voices became quieter. The island disappeared behind the ship. At last, the deadly song faded into silence.